In section 2.5, we talk about mitigation techniques. So how can you prevent attackers, cyber criminals, or malware from gaining access to your systems? How can you prevent all these things that we talked about from 2.1 to 2.4? How can you secure the organization? So let's talk about some mitigation techniques. First, you have segmentation. Segmentation is dividing a network into smaller, isolated segments to enhance security. This is used to limit the spread of malware, and this can be done by creating VLANs, for example. So what is a VLAN? Imagine you have the organization like that. You want to split the network architecture into different parts such that those in engineering can be in a separate VLAN, a virtual local area network. Those in accounting are on a separate network. Those in HR on a separate network, for example. It's usually more than that. So if Mohammed wants to connect to Pearl in HR, he will connect to Pearl with HR without having to connect to others in other floors. Or if you want to print to the engineering floor, he will not connect to the other networks. So some networks are made more secure than others and more private than others. This is one technique to mitigate attacks, segmentation, segmenting the network. Another way to mitigate attacks is to create access control lists. So an access control list is a list of rules that determines who or what can access a resource. You can do this by creating firewalls, for example. So with firewalls, you can have access control lists, and you have a list of IP addresses that you allow into the network and a list of IP addresses that you deny from accessing the network. You have application allow lists. What is an application allow list? This is a list of approved apps that are permitted to run on the system. So if you're given a work computer, for example, there is usually an application allow list in the operating system software that will only allow certain applications to be downloaded. If you try to download other applications, you will not be able to download them. So this is a way to prevent malware from getting into a computer as well. Isolation is separating systems to prevent interaction that could lead to security issues. For example, you run a high-risk application in the virtual machine, but then your other applications are run on the main network. This is another way to mitigate attacks. Obviously, patching. Patching is updating your software to fix vulnerabilities. Regularly patch, you regularly apply updates. You have encryption. Encryption converts data into a coded format to prevent unauthorized access. So if you have your disk with your files, rather than leaving your disk like that, you perform what we call full disk encryption. So you encrypt everything in the file such that even if a cyber criminal gains access to your disk, they will not be able to understand or make sense of whatever you have inside your disk. It's important to continuously monitor systems, observe, analyze the network, use SIEM tools, SIEM, security information and event management. One of the popular ones is called Splunk. Use tools like that to have real-time monitoring of your systems. It's important to implement the principle of least privilege. What is least privilege? This is granting users the minimum level of access necessary to perform their duties. You give them the minimum level of access necessary to perform their duties. So if you have an intern and you have a manager, they should not have the same level of access. The intern should have limited access based on his job responsibilities. The manager can have more access. Configuration enforcement. Ensure that systems are configured according to security best practices. So if you have to have multi-factor authentication, implement that. If you need minimum password requirements or complexity, implement that. Make sure they're configured according to best practices. Decommissioning is safely disposing outdated systems and devices. So when you're finished using a system or a device, don't just abandon it, but take the proper measure to get rid of that because it could still be an entry point into the network. Firewalls are very important hardening techniques as well. So configure firewalls on individual systems to control incoming traffic and outgoing traffic. Make sure the firewall will control whatever comes in and whatever goes out to prevent data exfiltration and to prevent the incoming cyber criminals. A similar system is a host-based intrusion prevention system. Host-based intrusion prevention system, HIPS, is a type of system or tool installed on an individual host, so an individual device, and it protects the system from attacks and unauthorized access. So it detects intrusions and it prevents the intrusion into the host. It's important to disable unnecessary services, shut down unnecessary ports and protocols to reduce attack surfaces. If you have a port that's open, disable that. Stop using that and prevent entry points into your system. It's very important as well to change default passwords on systems and devices. If you have a new router, if you have a new firewall, if you have a new server system or computer, generally the username on those systems on servers and firewalls are admin, and the password is usually password. So you change the default passwords, you make them stronger and more complex to prevent easy access. Also, remove unnecessary software into systems and devices. Software that is not required, that will not be used, get rid of them, and you will be more secure. A few more. Choose strong Wi-Fi passwords to prevent brute force attacks. Wi-Fi's can be easily broken into, so make sure that you choose strong passwords. Change your passwords regularly. Enable WPA2 or WPA3 encryption to make the network stronger. Be careful about what you're connecting to as well. Keep your software up to date. Regularly update software, update the operating system, use firewalls as previously mentioned. Monitor your network for unauthorized activities, scan the network, perform some vulnerability assessments, educate your users, train your users for training and awareness, and implement multi-factor authentication. So doing all this takes us to a concept called defense in depth. So what is defense in depth? Imagine you have Jeff who is trying to connect to a company network. When he's trying to connect, if it's a secure company, first there's a firewall, then there's an intrusion prevention system, then there's a VPN, then there's a VLAN, then the system is divided into multiple sub-networks. So what happens when Jeff first connects to the company servers? First, he goes through a firewall. The firewall checks if the connection is valid, if his IP address is authorized to get into the network. Then it goes through the IPS, the intrusion prevention system, to check if that's an intrusion, if that's unauthorized, if there is any malware. It checks for a few things. Then he goes into the VPN and the VPN verifies his connection. And then you will grant him an IP address for him to be connected to the internal network. Then he's connected to the VLAN, and the VLAN is splitting the network into different parts because he should not be connected to all parts of the network as it pleases him. He will only be connected to where he has to be connected. Then he goes to the IDS, intrusion detection system, that detects intrusions into the IT, for example. And finally, he's connected to the IT. Now, this is just an example. There are multiple different types of network architectures. This is just an example to show how it could be. So this is the end of Domain 2. Domain 2 was all about types of threat actors, types of threat vectors, and the types of vulnerabilities observed in systems.
All right, guys, that concludes our course for today. Let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed it. And make sure to follow us on all our social media platforms, which includes YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Of course, do not forget to order our awesome Amazon flashcards that you can get for just $15, and they're awesome because they help you study.